Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today I want to talk about falling off and what that means, how to get back on, how to fix yourself. Not that you need fixing, you're perfect just the way you are, but that's kind of what we're getting into today. Basically, if you started off the year strong, you had your goals, January hits, you have that beginning of the year motivation. Around this time, I would say February, March is when things start to slow down. You realize that it's going to take longer than you thought it would. You might have missed a day and then that day turned into a couple days, which turned into maybe weeks at this point. Who knows? If that's not you, good job. You're ahead. If that's even a thing to be ahead, but that's a topic for another podcast episode. Uh but if you're in that typical boat where you've hit a wall and you haven't been able to get yourself back on track, we're going to talk about that today. So where do I want to start with this? I guess there's a there's something about breaking things down into something you can understand. And there's a definition that I like from Layla Hormozy. She says resilience is your ability to get back to baseline. You can broaden this to it's not about whether or not you've fallen off. It's more, or I guess that's sort of one metric, but the other thing to look at is your recovery time. How quickly after falling off, after failing at something, can you get back into it? Can you recover? The thing I think when it comes to setting your New Year's goals and staying consistent with it and then missing a day, which is I think really where the falling off really starts, is after missing a day you realize nothing changes. Because like I said, the whole process of it isn't going to take 1 month. Whatever that goal is, whatever you've fallen off of, a lot of the time it takes a little bit of delayed gratification to actually see what you're working towards. And so when you miss a day and you realize that nothing has changed, it almost maybe tricks your brain into being like, what's the point, right? Uh, and then at that point, you can spiral, hit that all or nothing mindset where I guess maybe it comes back to what's the point again? Like, the thing is, the longer you put off getting back on track, the more you work up what getting back on track is. As soon as you stop doing that, you're building habits in the opposite direction, right? If you've done something every day, even if that's waking up earlier or something like that, right? And you do that every day, as soon as you break that habit, you're building consistency in the opposite direction. And the longer you stay on that side, the harder it is to get back onto working towards what you want to be working towards. So to not dwell on that part any longer, let's move on to how to actually get back on track. How do you, after you've fallen off, how do we fix that? because I was in the same boat. I hit that consistency up into a point that one day turned into multiple, and then you have to overcome that barrier of re-overcome that barrier of starting, which is, as anyone says, starting is kind of the hardest part, because that's where it takes the biggest, I don't want to say leap of faith, but that's where it takes the biggest jump in the beginning, is actually getting your foot in the door. Once you start rolling with it, it gets easier, but if you fall off, you have to reset. You have to go through that part, and I guess that's hard, right? It really is about taking that first step again, whatever that first step looks like for you. Once you've fallen off and once you've fallen off whatever it is you're working towards, there's a million different things battling in your head about almost trying to stop you from getting back on, pulling you to the opposite direction. You build up, like, okay, I'm going to talk from how I experience. Okay. I'm going to talk from how I experience, because that's the only thing I can really talk about. And for me, it's like I'm building up this expectation of how I want it to pan out. And the more that I sit on it, that I sit on that first step and build up that expectation, the harder it is to take it, because I know that it's probably not going to look like that. And so the gap between how I expect it to be and what's actually going to happen becomes so much bigger, which makes me feel worse about taking that first step and just getting out there and I guess restarting. And I think the whole process of getting back on track starts with realizing that you fell off. That I don't want to be too deep about it, but it's almost like you failed yourself. Like, if you told yourself you were going to do something and you came off of that, getting back on track takes a reduction of ego to realize that you didn't necessarily follow through with what you were going to say or what you were going to do. And that's kind of hard to admit to yourself. And then this is going to take longer than I thought it would. And that's harder to admit to yourself as well. And then it's realizing that getting back on track might require reducing, one, the expectation, but two, the size of that first step you can take. And admitting to yourself that that first step is something like almost so small to what you compared to what you want it to be, or where you see other people are, because obviously comparison is like such a terrible thing, but also such a great thing, but also terrible. Again, topic for another podcast episode. But it takes a sorry. It takes a self-awareness and letting go of that, I'm going to say, ego, to Admit to yourself that you've fallen off, that you have to get back on, and getting back on might require, like, it's not gonna look like how you expected it when you had that motivational high of going into it. And that's the realistic part of working towards anything, is that it takes consistency, and you're probably not going to see results for a while, and you'll see what everyone else is accomplishing, and you'll compare that to exactly where you are right now, which doesn't make much sense, but you're going to do it anyway because comparison isn't a logical emotion. It's not even an emotion, but the action of comparison. Um, and then you just have to sit with yourself and say, okay, I need to get back on track. It's not going to look like how I want it to, but I have to because I am working towards something, and that's more important to me. And if you don't know what getting back on track looks like to you, or you're not sure what that first step is, like, the entire idea of reworking towards it and getting back into where you were before, because realistically where you were before you dropped off or stopped showing up, it you might not realize it, but it took time to build up to that point. The habits you were doing, the routine that you had, it took time to build up to doing that every single day without thinking about it. And so when you drop off of that, you look at trying to be exactly where you were or further from before you stopped being consistent with it, and looking at that, it's like looking, what's the, like, you're looking at the top of the staircase instead of the first step. Or, like, you know what I'm saying? So okay. What do you do when that's where you're at? When you're ready to get back into it, but you don't know what that first step of getting back into it is? I saw something recently, and the idea is to set yourself up for the next set yourself up for success. Set yourself up for success. In And again, sometimes that sucks because that setting yourself the action of setting yourself up for success, again, it takes admitting that you're going to have to start smaller than you want to, or than you thought you could. But if you don't know what else to do, start by setting yourself up to be ready for the next thing to happen. And what I mean by that is, do the first thing to start to get your life back in order. If you don't know what else to do, start by waking up earlier. If you don't know what else to do, start by doing the next best thing you can do to get back to where you were or further. But don't focus on that part, focus on where you are right now and start there. I think that makes sense. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. If you don't know what else to do, start with the first thing towards getting your life back in order. And once you can do that consistently, you've shown yourself that you can do that. Start to add more stuff, but it's just about starting to build that forward momentum to getting back to where you were. And yeah, that can be mean starting small, and that's that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have to start small and to build momentum. And half the time I feel like our expectations are disoriented anyways. Because a lot of the time you don't see the small steps that have gone into building up towards where someone is. So you can trick yourself into thinking that it's supposed to look a different way. But then it's how do you know what it's supposed to look like if it hasn't happened yet anyways? So yeah, that's that's what we're going with. That's what we're going with today. That's what we're going with today. If you've fallen off, it's not a bad thing. It's not about falling off, it's about getting back on. It's about how quickly can you recover to getting back to where you were, because the longer you sit with it, this is my episode TLDR because I ramble. So, yeah. The longer you sit with it, the harder it is, the more you build up what that first step will be. And in order to take that, it takes a bit of an ego hit to tell yourself that, you know, yeah, I messed up. I fell off. And maybe this is going to take longer than I thought. And maybe all of these things, all run through all the things that you're telling yourself in your head, and tell yourself you're wrong because you're like, it's all, I don't want to say it's all made up, but there's so much we make it out to be that's not actually how it is. So you have to take a step back, take a step back, or maybe not take a step back because you want to take a step forward, but just realize where you are for what it actually is, and then go through the process of getting yourself back in order by just taking the next best action to setting yourself up for success. You don't have to know 3 steps ahead. Just like what's the next thing? What's the next thing you can do to start to build up that momentum and get back to where you were? Or this also applies to if you weren't on track in the first place. But yeah. And once you're at that point, then you can, like, once you get back to a baseline, you can build off of that, and it's so much easier to build off of that when you have like a set of routine, a set of discipline that's going to compound over time, but you just have to realize that it's going to take time. And the other thing that I want to mention before we end this episode is that I guess we're going to hit one more barrier to starting that I kind of touched on already, but I want to come back to it again. And that's on building up the expectation for what it's supposed to look like. Because the other barrier to starting is thinking that you should be further by now. And that it should look like, maybe part of the reason you fell off is because when you did, like I said, you realized that nothing changed. You realized that you didn't get over the point of making progress, because it takes time to make even that initial bit of progress. You get that motivational high, and you start to realize it's going to take longer. You don't get over that next part where you actually start to make progress. And so when you do fall off, it's harder to get back on because you ended on a part where you weren't really sure with, like, if what you're doing was even right. And that goes back to the fact that you don't see a lot of the beginning stages, the consistency that other people put in to get to where they are. You only see what they're doing now and where they are now. And so focusing on that is doing you a bit of a disservice, because that's not the realism of what the actual process looks like. And that's also their process, not yours. Where you are and where you're going is going to look different from other people because you're a different person. And building up the expectation for what it's supposed to look like, again, how do you know what it's supposed to look like? You don't. You can only know what's best for you right now and take action towards that, and then keep going. And I guess trust it'll all work out. And that's kind of what we're going with. So yeah, I hope that helps someone. If you listen this far, thank you for listening. And we're going to leave it there. Good luck with whatever you're working on.